So I hope you'll forgive me. I am a total believer and advocate in the notion of research-informed design, sometimes called evidence-based design. Most of my publishers ask me to use evidence-based design. I'm not very fond of it, but they want it to pop up when somebody puts it in Google. I believe, as fully as I can possibly believe, that an evidence-based approach, a process of design, is suitable for any type of design. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about engineering or architecture, interior design, product design, whether you're talking about healthcare, my field, or whether you're talking about residential design. There is the potential to use evidence on behalf of the design process in a way that supports everything. So forgive me, because a lot of my examples are going to be as if we're talking about healthcare. But I want you to recognize I'm not suggesting to you that it's the only place where an evidence-based approach is suitable. So I can't imagine how I got into healthcare design. I never would have chosen it. And it sort of happens by accident. You get a job with a firm and they ask you to do something and you sort of scratch your head and say, oh Lord, how am I going to do this? It's so complicated and so on. And then if you pull it off, they sort of say, oh, well, he's done one, you know, have him do it again. And then the next thing you know, you're accidentally on your pathway to becoming a specialist. There's nothing wrong with specializing. I think it's actually a powerful way for you to advance your career. The 30 years of practice, I basically was a hospital designer. I designed clinics and outpatient facilities, but essentially hospitals and medical schools. So I am twisted in a bizarre way. The title that I've chosen here is using rigorous evidence in the design process, and that's because over the years I came to believe that architecture was really not a very rigorous process. Architects find it too easy to hide behind what I think of as the cape and beret and sort of say, no, you know, I'm the expert in this, please, you know, ignore what you're thinking, you have to trust me on this. And so the decisions are made are subjective and arbitrary, and they're justified by the fashion, and if you can be on the cover of the magazine, oh Lord, the emperor has no clothes, right? So this is part of my belief as I earned my master's degree and so forth, that architecture would do well to increase its level of rigor. That goes for interior design as well. I was telling the development officer that I was a licensed interior designer in the state of Texas before I ended up on the faculty at A&M, where they don't pay for any of your licenses, so I've lapsed that license. So this whole notion is pretty much a common sense thing, isn't it? I mean, how can you say that, oh, I'd really rather not have any facts, I just want to make the decision on a totally arbitrary and random basis? So we all know within our heart and soul that you gotta have some basis for the way you make your decision. So a design process that is informed by research and the results of research is basically one that relies on research in order to make the best possible decisions. And of course you're making these decisions on behalf of a client and on the basis of an individual project. So if you think about it, there are a number of things in society today, all of which have some relationship to evidence. We talk about data-driven decision-making. When you read the annual reports of big companies, you know, they're proclaiming how well they have used the research that they do in the marketplace. We talk about management by the numbers. Manufacturing process is being driven by a whole series of research bases. Even laboratory tests done at Underwriters Lab and other places are all examples of using evidence in a variety of ways in contemporary society. And the last one on the list, evidence-based medicine, is something that came very close to me as a hospital designer. I found myself having to deal with people who every day referred to evidence-based medicine. And so for me, evidence-based design in healthcare is an analog, a direct analog to evidence-based. So Brandt, Chong, and Martin, in their book, Design Informed, Driving Innovation in Evidence-Based Design, basically have these two quotes. Actually, there are two consecutive paragraphs on the same page. The first paragraph basically saying, you know, evidence-based design is a good thing, it can improve things. And then the second paragraph is the sort of dirty secret, which is, but you know, people don't really understand this, and a lot of people think it means you're going to have to do cookbook design where your choices are limited, and others are frankly terrified of it because they have no idea how to evaluate research, how to go search for information, and don't really know how to conduct an evidence-based process. So it's fascinating. I can't imagine why the term evidence-based medicine does not appear until 1996. I mean, I think of the scientific revolution, and in the 1880s we're having all these advances in medicine, and so it's not until 1996 that we actually have this language appearing. And the most famous definition is David Sackett and his colleagues. They were in Canada at the time that this was written, and it's essentially evidence-based medicine is the conscientious, explicit, and judicious use of current best evidence in making decisions about the care of individual patients. So this is all about making decisions. It's about referring to the best evidence that's available, and it's about individual patients. It's not about a whole group of everybody who has leukemia. It's about Fred or Sally. And so I shamelessly stole a lot from this. So my definition, published multiple times, what is evidence-based design? Well, it's the conscientious, explicit, and judicious use of current best evidence. Where have we heard that before, right? From research and practice. So not just research, but referring to what you learn from practice itself, to make critical decisions together with an informed client. You really have to be working together with your client about the design of each individual and unique project. So it's exactly the same model, isn't it? It's about making decisions, it's about using the best evidence, and instead of individual patients, we're talking about individual projects, because that's the realm in which designers work. So what's going on? Wow, you know, this thing is exploding. There are, you know, articles and books and journals and so on. It's everywhere, and this is why my publishers are always asking me to, you know, use the term evidence-based design, so that, you know, I think if you went to Google and punched it in, you'd get lots and lots of stuff. So in healthcare in particular, which you're seeing here, because that's my realm, there's an enormous amount of stuff. Now, I don't understand why the field of design for criminal justice, or design for education, or design for a variety of other topics aren't equally pushy about getting to this new level of understanding. But let's just say that I'm lucky I'm in the field that actually appreciates this and is pushing in a rapid way. Now, I know that you're focused primarily on interior design, so in my subset of the world, there is a group, the American Academy of Healthcare Interior Designers. They board certify in the specialty of healthcare design, and it includes things like this graduate research fellowship. They're paying real money to somebody every year. There you see a recent recipient receiving acclamation, maybe not the check, but you're seeing them from the president of the organization in a past year. So, all right, 2003, I thought I'm going to write an article and I'm going to describe an evidence-based project. You know, I'm going to lay new ground here. So, Well, how much evidence is required to qualify as an evidence-based project? How many decisions have to be based on research? So everybody knows that carpets can be specified on the basis of the underwriter's lab. They have a flame spread rating, and so in my domain, in the healthcare world, we have to meet certain minimum requirements for flame spread, and so that's an evidence-based decision, isn't it? Surely it qualifies. But it's just one decision. If that's the only thing that you did, and we all have to do flame spread ratings on our carpet decision, so does it really meet the standard of making it an evidence-based project? Probably not. On the other hand, if we got this magnificent grant from the National Institutes of Health, and they gave us huge dollars and gave us access to world experts, and we could make almost every decision on the project on the basis of the best available evidence, surely that would qualify as an evidence-based project. But the question is, without a consensus, who am I to say where along that scale, somewhere in between just one decision and practically every decision, where does the evidence-based project lie? Where exactly could you make that statement? Okay, so I failed completely. I could not write the article about what is an evidence-based project. So I changed the topic. I decided to write what is an evidence-based practitioner. And so 2003, you can see this was the first time this was published. This is my 4 levels. You don't have to sort of read all this, but what I want you to notice is that from level 1 to level 4, it's cumulative. Nothing falls off as you get to higher levels. Nothing goes away. It's only increasing what must be done. So basically, a level 1 practitioner, and this is what I thought I was. I was convinced that I had spent my career. I learned about people like Edward T. Hall, and I was reading sociology textbooks when I was in school. And so, by golly, I was a total believer that you could get information from scholars, and if I stayed current with the literature, I would make thoughtful interpretation of what I was reading, and I would be able to figure out what the implication of that was for my project. I would include it in a real project, and I would then go see the project and say, you know, what's working around here? You know, let me find the success stories, and I'll be able to tell people, you know, how well it went. And I was pretty comfortable in that role. I thought that was what being an evidence-based practitioner was all about. But because I was being serious about this, I thought about it a little more and realized that there's a whole nother level. Now, this is my personal opinion, but today I believe that anybody who is not at level 2 is not really a genuine evidence-based practitioner. So what this means is you've got to do all that stuff we talked about on the last slide, but you must add a hypothesis about the intended outcome of your design. And then you identify an appropriate measure to see if you, oh, this is a bad slide. It says prove or disprove. It shouldn't. It should say, see if your hypothesis is supported or not. This is a relic of old thinking. Designers like to say that they are proving something with their design research, but any scholar, any physician in my case, any real scientist laughs at you. And they think you're ignorant and don't know what you're talking about if you say you've proven something. This is about human behavior in a physical environment that has multiple variables that can't really be controlled. So the closest you can come is to make a claim about, in this particular situation, something appears to be correlated or, you know, but you never know any of that unless you measure the results. So what's this hypothesis thing? Well, I'm a believer that every designer who's been at any design program anywhere in the world has been trained to think about their design concepts in such a way that you say to yourself, as you start to draw that line, you must be saying somewhere in your head, if I arrange it this way, it will be better than it would have been the other way, right? So you have these implicit, unstated, tacit hypotheses going on in your head all the time as you're a designer. But none of us have ever been educated. None of us had the training to write it down. And that's a flaw. Hopefully, as you get involved in this, we'll start to do more of that. And you don't have to do it for every single line you put on the paper, but for some things you need to be able to say, the orientation of this cafe and the way the sun is going to reflect off of the Ando Museum across the water from us is going to be quite special, and as a result of that, I need to raise up the level of the bottom beneath that water so that the roundness of those rocks will cast really special shadows on that wall, right? And you need to be able to hypothesize that instead of coming out the next morning and sort of saying after they've finished it, look at that. The shadows are pretty cool, aren't they? Right? So you need to be prepared to say in advance what your intention as a designer is, and then you need to have some way of being able to measure it. Now what's really cool about this is if you can hypothesize what it's supposed to do, you're halfway or better toward knowing what it is you have to measure in order to see if it really did happen, right? So the statement of the hypothesis is leading you to the decision on how to measure your. Well, then I thought, well, maybe there's another level. Okay, so a level 3 practitioner does all of that and then is committed to sharing the results publicly beyond the project team. You might do all sorts of things, third-party occupancy evaluation. These are people who speak at conferences, they appear, they write, they do a variety of things, but they're prepared to share their information about what they've learned from their real projects with the rest of us. Now this is a bit of a problem. I know my main area is architecture, and too many architects believe somehow that the silly stuff that they found out about their projects is proprietary and they dare not share it with somebody else for fear that the other guy will get an advantage in the marketplace. And this is a crock. It's not true. It doesn't, that's a myth. And in fact, you gain advantage in the marketplace by openly sharing, and your potential clients recognize you as someone who is advancing the knowledge and who has more knowledge. So it's to your advantage to learn to share. And then level 4 essentially says, well, let's share at the level of academic rigor. Let's collaborate with academics or social scientists, or in my case, physicians or research scientists that are in the organizations I work with. Let's submit material to peer-reviewed journals, not just the professional journals. And in some cases, some of us decide to go on to pursue graduate education. I am currently a doctoral student at Arizona State, not because it means anything to my job. I'm already a tenured full professor. It's not going to change my salary or anything, but I am learning in a clinical science a higher level of rigor than I was originally taught as a design student in an architecture program. Be careful. The first time I presented this stuff, I didn't say this part. And so everybody thought that, oh my God, I have to be academic in level 4, and if I don't do it on all my projects, I'm not up to. Well, no. Most major projects that you do, you would probably do at level 2. You really need to have hypotheses and you need to measure some stuff. But a bunch of projects that pass through a typical office are just going to be best practice. You don't have to go to all sorts of high-level snooty stuff. It doesn't take a PhD to do a renovation that doesn't really include anything new. You're serving your client, and it's just perform at the level of best practice and get it done and collect your fee. Now you may want to do a few projects at level 3 where you're going to share the information about it. It's special enough, it's different enough that it's worth telling that story in a public way. And really only a few projects are going to end up in the level 4 where you're submitting peer-reviewed articles, okay? So it's a balance of things that are getting done. It was helpful for me to tell people that they didn't have to learn how to be at level 4. For one thing, a lot of people who thought of it that way said, oh, I can't do evidence-based design. I'm not in for that. So let me shift now to my world a little bit. And I want to talk about what's called healing environments by many, or therapeutic environments, I think is a better term. Architects, interior designers, and their clients say that they want to create healing environments. And that's really a noble cause. That's a good thing to want to produce. Let me show you an example from my practice days. Now remember, I haven't been practicing for at least 10 years, so this is back a ways. The image in the lower right is the before photograph. This is a renovation, and the image, the larger image, is what we did with it. Now a bunch of people said, "Oh, that's a terrific project, congratulations, you've got a great healing environment." And my chest is swelling and I'm feeling proud. Yes, I think it's possibly a healing environment. And then when you think about it, you realize, uh-oh, do I think that just because of intuition, or is there any real rigor behind the statement that this is a healing environment? By the way, I was really infuriated by people who would make claims in their interviews to compete with me. And they would say, "Oh, we're a healing environment." And as long as it had carpet on the floor and indirect lighting, they thought they had done a healing environment. So intuition is basically just simply looking at it and saying, "I think this looks better. Surely this is healing," right? But rigor requires you to have some kind of result. And so if it's a healing environment, if that's the claim, then I'd like to know who was healed and how is it that you know they were healed, right? It's too easy to just say it's a healing environment. So I'm publicly on record as saying a healing environment can always be identified by evidence from some kind of measurement and results. Okay? Now, if that turns out to be the case, then evidence-based designs whose process was evidence-based, they might or they might not result in a healing environment. So what does that mean? Well, that means as much as we used evidence in our process, and it was an evidence-based design process, we might get lousy results. We may discover that, oh, well, that's much too home-like, and people don't behave like sick people, and they didn't get well. They stayed longer, and they delayed their hospital stays, and as a result of that, the facts show that these rooms that were redesigned are not as good as those crummy old rooms that we replaced. That didn't happen. But if that had happened, it is plausible for me to say that an evidence-based process might not lead to a healing design. Okay? So remember that evidence-based design is not a thing, it's a process. It's how you do it. So, all this being true, a healing environment is the result of a design that has demonstrated measurable improvements in the physical and/or psychological states, patients and/or staff, physicians, family, and visitors. Everybody that impacts, or everybody who is influenced by and impacted by the environment that you have created, you need to be able to demonstrate that something is going on. And if that's true, then a healing environment is truly a complementary treatment modality that makes a therapeutic contribution to the course of care. Now, when I'm speaking to other kinds of audiences in healthcare, I always say, my caveat is, please don't misunderstand me. I do not intend to imply that the design of the physical environment is more effective than a surgical intervention or a pharmacological intervention. I don't even believe it's more effective than the caring touch of a nurse, a compassionate person who makes a direct connection to the person who is being treated. But if there is evidence that connects the design of the physical environment to these changes in a positive way, then the environment is a therapeutic contribution to the course of care. It makes a contribution to the healing process, and so on. Okay, so why am I whining about rigor? What in the world do I mean by that? Well, I mean it's a serious search for and use of relevant evidence. And it consists of a chain of logic. You need to be able to go from the evidence that you found to some kind of a design concept. And everybody who's been in any kind of design education anywhere in the world knows how to produce a design concept. You're not a designer if you can't produce a design concept that gets implemented in a project. Well, what does that mean? Well, it requires critical thinking. It means careful interpretation of what you're reading. And as far as I'm concerned, that's a creative process that actually requires some real skill. And so the people who say, oh, no, 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 evidence-based design is cookbook design, and it's just formulaic and it will take away all of our creativity, they've never tried it. They've never really tried to do this. The hypotheses, I've already shared with you that I think this makes the minimum burden to call yourself an evidence-based practitioner. So you predict the expected outcomes associated with those design concepts. You document that intent in advance in writing so that you can, it's like a pool. You know, you're supposed to call your shot, you know, 8-ball in the side pocket, and if the 8-ball goes in the corner instead, you're in trouble, right? So it's the same sort of theory. You've got to tell us in advance, this is what I was trying to do, so that the results that you get can be attributed to what you were trying to do and don't appear to simply be random. And then if you've done your hypotheses, you're going to have a measurement, you're going to commit to document those outcomes and test your hypotheses. And you're going to use appropriate methods for those kinds of measurements. And then ultimately you commit to sharing what you learned. Okay, so I went to my own firm, and boy, you know, I'm a public figure who promotes this notion of evidence-based design, and everybody in the firm, they're behind me all the way. You know, totally committed to what we're doing. But it turns out they had no clue of how to actually do it. So we sat down and I produced this model for how you would actually take a real project and do it. So you can see at number 1, you identify the goal of the client. Number 2, you identify the firm's goals. And number 3, you identify the top 3 key design issues. 1 or 2 is really better than 3. I would contend that anyone who received a design education in any specialty anywhere in the world knows how to do those 3 things. You can't be a designer without understanding those top 3. So in terms of identifying the key design issues, you really want to work on those issues that will make the biggest difference to the project. So a high impact decision is worth investing an effort into making an evidence-based process in a way that low impact decisions are not. Okay? So now here's where the system varies. Number 4, you got to convert the design issues into researchable questions. And that means you have to restate the statement of a design issue so that you can go to the literature and find out information that is around that idea. And what you'll discover is the key issue is going to be a very short statement, but the type of things that you want to research is going to probably be a much longer list. So then go gather the information. You might find it from literature sources. You might benchmark real examples. The firm may have information in-house about other projects and so on. And then you, after you've collected it, you make critical interpretations of what you found. Okay, now I contend that those 3 steps, converting the design issue to researchable questions and going to the literature to find stuff and then interpreting what you find, that's the part that I was never taught. I don't think the majority of design students anywhere in the world are really taught that. It's starting to happen, and it's an important advance in terms of the way I think design ought to be taught. Okay, so if you're gathering the information and you think you have no idea what you're looking for, the world is an infinite barrel of information from which you can draw. There's almost nothing that doesn't have some bearing on what you're thinking. And as a result of that, your task, the creative part of this, is you've got to learn how to narrow it down so that the material that you're working with is the stuff that really makes a difference, right? And the opposite of that is, if you think you already know it, well, we did 6 projects like that already, and that's not a big issue. We know how to do that. Well, there you're in trouble, because now you need to take your limited perspective and you need to expand it. So if you think you know the answer, you better get good at looking farther. And if you have no idea, you got to get good at narrowing. Okay? Both of those things are skills that are not necessarily easy. And so it can be learned, and you need to be prepared to work on that. Now, critical interpretation of the evidence. So no one has yet written a scholarly article about a building that you haven't built yet, right? So there will not be anything that is totally directly applicable to exactly your situation. The best you're going to get is something that's similar or something that's close. So in every case, you have to interpret what is implied from the research and the findings that you have access to your own specific and unique project. And I like to say it doesn't matter if it's a repetitive project. So let's say it's McDonald's and they're putting 15 of them out there, right? But there are 15 different sites with 15 different sets of gas lines, 15 different ways to connect the electricity, 15 different topographical situations, 15 different conditions to connect the sewers. It may be that they're in communities where they have to have bilingual signs in Vietnamese in English because of the neighborhood in which they built it in. There are so many things that say we've got to interpret what we've learned from this stuff. I had an example where we did 2 obstetric units in 2 different hospitals, and we used exactly the same data. It was close enough to the timing for each other that we didn't search for additional information. We were relatively current. And the results we got were quite different because of the cultural differences between the population using the 2 hospitals gave us different answers. So don't assume that just because you've gathered the data that it doesn't need to be interpreted and focused to your specific unique project. All right, so now we're back to everything we know, right? Everybody who's been in the design game knows how to create a design concept. Now, in this case, we're asking you to use the evidence that you've gathered to inform the concepts that you're starting to use. So you knew how to do the first 3, and now you're back to your familiar zone with design concepts. So based on creative interpretation of the implications, you're going to have these design concepts, and the design concepts will lead you to the expected results from the implementation of your design, and then you will be able to select measures to determine if your hypotheses are supported or not. Never claim proof. So this is what should have been on that other slide, right? Okay, so you know how to do design concepts. And in your head, you've been thinking about what does that concept mean to the people that are going to use this building. All you got to do is sort of write it down and say, you know, we expect greater traffic to go to the coffee shop in the lobby. So how would you measure that? Well, we'll count people that go to the coffee shop. You know, it's not rocket science. Now, my staff, after we did this, told me, well, you know, you could be wrong about that. I sometimes develop my hypothesis first, and then I produce the concept. Okay? Right, they're right. Not only can you start this and sort of go one way or the other, but sometimes by the time you're down here, I better go back and go to the literature again. I need to, you know, pursue something else. So this was an example that I used in a real project. This is a real cancer center, and the client thought we had the answer already. And I tried to say, no, 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 it's a process, it's a process. So I used this to sort of show them how it worked. So this is basically what you saw on the previous slide. The first part of it, the client's goals for a cancer center and the firm's goals and so on, and they told me that the top design issue was drug mix errors. Okay? Now everything beyond that is sort of fake because I was trying to explain how you do it. So the examples were, you know, research questions, what are the factors in drug mix errors, what evidence relates medication error to environmental factors. If I went to the literature, I knew that I would find things in this sort of shopping list of issues. If I critically interpreted, it's plausible. I didn't actually do it, but it's plausible that I would have concepts that related to enclosure, where the drug mixing went on, to task lighting, sound control, to air change and fresh air movement, even to barcoding technologies. Okay, so all of those things could plausibly be included as my interpretations, which would lead me to design concepts about how to design the room and the lighting and thermostats and so on. And then my hypothesis would theoretically be fewer drug errors, right? And I would measure it with standard error reports. Is that a good hypothesis? People are nodding. It's a trick question. It's a lousy hypothesis. If we did all this trouble and we had one less error next year, would you be pleased? So usually the statement of the hypothesis would require something a little more tangible. We're going to drive our errors to zero, or we're going to cut our errors in half, or whatever. There'd be some statement that would be a little more specific than this. But this helped them understand what I was talking about. So maybe quickly to sort of share with you how it plays out, you state the key issue, so it's reduce chemotherapy drug mix errors. That's a pretty simplistic statement, but you have to examine each of those specific words. What do they mean by error? It has all these different variations of what it could mean. What do they mean by drug mix? What is going on in these mixing elements? All of those can be researched, and you can find literature about any of that. So it's not as simple as just I'll put the first phrase, those 5 words, into Google and see what comes up. So others, what's chemotherapy? What's meant by reduction? This is where you sort of say, no, it's not one less error per year. I'm going to have some percentage, or I'm going to eliminate all error, or something that's a little more. Then you can look at the issue itself. What are the environmental factors that play into this? What are the behavioral factors that play into this? What are the organizational factors that play into this? So as you can see, there's a lot that you could go to the library and search for that might have some relevance to your issue of we're going to reduce drug mix errors. You need to know what other people already know. You need to find out what's been thought of. Key words are going to help you. You have to be like a detective and go find something out that you didn't know before. You're going to explore the references. So you may find an article from one person that relates to your topic, so go see the references that they had in their paper and see if there's anything interesting there. You can actually email or call the original author sometimes and start a conversation about your topic. So the advice is like, the real estate advice, location, location, and location. Well, the advice for a researcher is read the literature, read the literature, read the literature. And so you need to go to find sources. What's the quality of the journal? Can you identify the quality of the authors and their expertise? Do you feel like the methods that they're using in their research are appropriate for the questions that they're asking? Can you trust their conclusions? Are they making the right conclusion based on the data that they've shared with you? And so, read the literature, read the literature, read the literature is good advice. So I'm going to go really quickly through an example. So let's just say our client goal was patient safety, and we were going to have an evidence-based project, and the key issue here is patient falls. And so our researchable question are all these environmental and other factors. We collected our literature, we critically interpreted it, and let's just say we produced all of these variations of things that might come out of this as concepts. So there's a whole list of possible things ranging from changing the floor material to handrails and other issues that might work with that. We would then have hypotheses about them and measurements that would tell us whether it worked. So the concepts are directly linked to the hypothesis. The designers create these concepts, and you've got to know what you're thinking is going to happen as a result of this. So you're predicting the outcome, and you state that prediction in the form of a hypothesis, and they have to be recorded in. So the hypothesis has to be tested. Testing requires measurement. Measurement has to be appropriate, and the measurement should be narrow, precise, and suited to what you were trying to do to answer a specific question. You gather your data. You try to avoid bias. Unobtrusive data is something that I learned in the social sciences, and as far as I could tell, nobody in my college understands it. So I don't know if you guys have heard it, but unobtrusive data is data that the client is already gathering. So we all know that if you require the client to do a new study, I want you to count everybody that goes in and out of the front door next week. Well, by changing the behavior of the client, you alter the way the results will be collected. So unobtrusive data is data that's gathered from some method that in no way changes the situation. And the cool thing about it is, for those of us that are consultants to our clients, we're not having to pay for that data. We just get them to, send it over in an email. Then you collect and analyze the data and share the results ultimately either internally or with the client or with the whole field. So the client has to be prepared to deal with this. They have to understand what they're getting from their consultants, and the design team has to be organized to do this. So I know you can't read this. This was prepared for an organization in St. Louis that won the Baldrige Award and is highly regarded, and they invited us to talk to them about process. So you can't read it, but basically those are the phases of the project across the top, and these are the various constituents: administration, users, architects, engineers, patients, contractors, and the bottom row is totally new. I had never done an organization chart for a project that included a researcher as an active member of the design team. This was new. And so everything in the white across the bottom is stuff that we hadn't really had in the process in the past. And then in the phases across the top, this one says hypothesize and that one says measure. So these two columns in the vertical are also aspects of an evidence-based project that weren't in my previous thinking about how one produces a project. So part of what this basically is telling us is that there are new roles for design researchers, people that have a PhD or have a master's degree and are interested in measuring and finding out what's going on as a result of design interventions. And what is fascinating is that now in the major firms around the country, they are hiring people with PhDs to do design research in an applied way within the firms, instead of only having, if you got your PhD, your only option is to go to the academic world. So now there is something going on in the profession. I think it's at the beginning, and my prediction would be within another 10 years, it will be quite common for design firms to have researchers as part of the team. Now they may be switch hitters who can do design and research, but I have a feeling that you'll see far more qualified researchers as part of design firms in the near future. So I think of precedent. People say, oh, well, this evidence-based design is not new. We've always had evidence, and it's true. It is not new. We've always used financial and economic data. We know how to do lighting because there's good data about how lighting works. We've always used information from structural engineering and so forth, lateral forces, the weather. A bunch of things have always been part of an evidence-based element of the design process. I contend that the lead sustainable design process is really the first truly evidence-based piece that is widespread. The lead guys and the U.S. Green Building Council are so busy gathering the data and justifying every single one of the checklist items that is in their stuff that they don't have time to think of themselves as being evidence-based. But every one of the elements in those checklists is actually supported by real data from research. So the lead people are probably out ahead of the rest of us. Design has always been a blend of art and science, and so we've always had evidence from real estate economics, building sciences, engineering sciences. What's new in my field today that merits identification with a label like evidence-based or research-informed is that we're now being asked to go deeper into evidence that comes from the social sciences or the clinical sciences. So in addition to what we've always done, the label, which is kind of a mislabel at the time, is really about this additional stuff that we weren't trained necessarily to go to. Evidence-based practice does not mean lousy design. It can support all sorts of variations and ranges of quality of what gets done. I would not say, it's just as easy to say high quality design is possible as it is to say that some of it may be pretty awful. But that's true for all of it. So clients may be looking for variations of ways in which evidence might be used. It's not all for the sake of healing environment. Some clients may be focused entirely on the issue of safety. Other clients may be talking about operational performance. They need efficiency. They need to be able to get the most out of their staff. Others may be just absolutely freaked out about flexibility and they're worried about change, and so they want a design that can adapt over time in different ways. Their other clients are going to be interested in organizational culture. One of the things you can do with design is if you have behaviors that you don't like, you can design them out. An example of that is the way we've been treating people who were smokers. So for a period of time, the sort of smoking was moved just outside the door, and then, so pretty soon, well, we have a little pavilion out there with ashtrays and so on. So design can limit and restrict behaviors that are not desired, and design can support activity that, thank you, I don't know that I'll really need that, but so in the healthcare world today, experience is a big word. We've been designing for experience for a long time, but now there are articles about it and so on. Obviously, some clients are going to want to design for sustainability. And unfortunately, as much as we would like not to hear it, we're going to have clients for whom cost control and the bottom dollar is the most important element. Well, those guys can have evidence-based process in support of reducing the cost of their work in the same way that these guys can have evidence-based process in support of an ecologically sustainable design, and so on and so forth. So don't think of it as singular. You can apply the process to any range of design topics, any range of what your client's goals might be. So for sort of the research and scholarly world, people love to use the 2x2 grid because it lets you compare two items, so on. So here is my sort of cheesy version. The axes on the bottom, we have the impact of the decision. There are decisions that have low impact. It doesn't really make a huge difference. And so that's a low impact decision. And then there are other decisions where, boy, that's a biggie, and it's going to be important. Then over here, I've sort of changed the language a little bit. Usually it would be degree of certainty or something like that, but I wanted high at the top. So high uncertainty means we really don't know what we're talking about here, right? And low uncertainty means we got great information. Okay, we know what's going on here. So if you don't know anything, but it doesn't matter, well, this is a great opportunity to be subjective and creative, right? If there's good information, but it doesn't matter, you can still have quite a bit of flexibility, but keep it simple, don't let it get out of hand. And if you've got really good information and it's an important decision, you better get this one right. You don't get this one right, your client isn't going to ever ask you back, okay? So this is demanding. You really have to get the good information and highly important decisions. You have to get these right. So it's up here where you don't know what's going on, but you're really nervous because the decision is going to be important. This is the one where you're dealing with discovery. You need to have original, critical thinking. This is the zone where you would perform research in many of these cases. You might do some research in order to help you make that decision. Or at best, you need to go to the literature to find out what other people know so that you can explain to your client that you've made the best decision based on the current best information, and, you know, we'll take our chances on what comes out the other side, right? So the area over there where the impact of the decision is low, that's the area of maximum design freedom. You can kind of do whatever you want over there. And this is a place where you can wear the cape and beret and where you can say, you know, do it my way, because Michelangelo and I have decided that this is the, you know, this is the epitome of quality design. But it's up here across the top where little is known. That's the domain of highest creativity. That's the area where you've got to apply your ability to be Sherlock Holmes and to go find the information, to go find the sources that tell you what you might do in these ambiguous situations where something is not clear. I hope that makes sense to people. So, sort of back to conclusion maybe. You know, what is evidence-based practice? Well, evidence-based designers make critical decisions together with that informed client on the basis of the best available information from credible research and the evaluation of completed projects. So my advice, especially to practitioners who are doing real projects, but this is true for students as well, is you start with the project that's on your desk today. You don't wait for a project that starts at the beginning, or for the big one, or for the, you know, whatever gives you a way to convince yourself that you shouldn't start right away. So start now with whatever is on your desk at whatever level it is in terms of completion. Research 1 to 3 key issues. This is a place I made a horrible mistake. The first time I published back in 2003, I said 1 to 5. And what I learned was you can't possibly do serious effort, and I don't even think 1 to 3 is a good answer. I think 2 is probably pushing it. At best, especially for students, start with 1 and sort of do a rigorous job of understanding that one issue before you launch yourself into larger numbers. So collect the evidence that's associated with that key issue, as we've gone through already. Retain whatever you collect, and then as you do additional projects in the future, your archive is going to grow. So in a firm that's doing 10 projects a year, and they collect, you know, 100 articles for those 10 projects, then the next year they do 10 more. Maybe 2 of them are kind of repetitive types, and so now we're talking about 18 projects, you know, and then the next year maybe they do 7 that are different, so we're up to about 25 projects. So you can see, just by simply starting with one project and collecting the information and keeping it current, you make progress. So I know a sort of humorous thing is an awful lot of the giant firms decided, oh, evidence-based design is real. Oh, we got to gather the data. We need to assign somebody, and we're going to collect everything that we need to have, and we're going to put it in a giant server that will keep all this information for us. And so, Freddie, you go do it. And, oh, you know, everybody who was given an assignment like that totally failed. So it's not possible to just go randomly collect stuff that you think is going to be useful. It's really only useful if it's applicable to your project and meaningful to your project. And don't lose it. You know, keep it in case it becomes relevant again. So, thank you.